Hello everyone, this is topic 5, written language, situations of written communication. Introduction. For some time, communicative approaches seem to deal only with the oral register, leaving the written one aside. This situation no longer holds, since it can't be ignored that we very often communicate our messages and feelings through writing. Indeed, for many students, especially visual language school students, writing is an essential skill in academic and professional English. Needless to say, both spoken and written languages are forms of the same language, since it is the same linguistic system underlying them. However, what's important to note here is that they exploit different features of the system and gain their power in different ways. This is essential in the language classroom, since neither teachers nor students should aim for the same results and types of behavior in the two mediums. The Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the subsequent companion volume, and the official curriculum for official language schools highlight the importance of distinguishing both modes of expression. The teacher needs to be aware of the characteristics of each mode so as to teach learners how to communicate effectively, depending on the channel of communication. Features of written language. Essentially, written expression is more conceptually dense, more polished, planned and concentrated than the spoken form. It also tends to be rather more highly coded and more removed from the categories of our experience. Let's now proceed to analyze it in further detail according to different criteria. The first one is permanence. Spoken language is fleeting, it happens, whereas written language is permanent, it exists. This allows the reader to reread if it's necessary, but also forces the writer to be more careful about what they write. Complexity. Writing and speech represent different modes of complexity, the most salient difference lying in the nature of clauses. Essentially, writing has longer clauses and more subordination than speaking. Moreover, whereas oral language achieves its complexity through highly complex sentence structure, written language does it through dense lexical content. Lexical features. The written mode makes use of a more precise vocabulary essentially because it allows more processing time. There is also a tendency to use Latinisms in place of Anglo-Saxon words. Organizational features. Since writing allows more time to think and organize ideas, it is usually clearly planned, demanding a writer's conformity to conventions such as paragraph topics, logical order, preference for non-redundancy, and subordination of clauses, and so on and so forth. Grammatical metaphor. A grammatical metaphor is a situation where meaning typically realized by one form is realized by other less typical linguistic choice. An outstanding example of this would be nominalization. That is when something that would typically be represented as a verb is represented by a noun instead. Formality. Writing is frequently more formal than speech. In writing there are fewer contractions and phrasal verbs, and there is an absence of colloquialism and idiomatic language. Graphic or visual features. In written language, almost the whole burden of the communication falls on linguistic elements. Context. Whereas the spoken language can partly depend on the context, a written text needs to stand more or less by itself. It needs to be context independent. Turn-taking monologic organization. The language we use in a spoken situation will typically be organized according to the turn-by-turn sequencing of talk. Written language, however, will be produced as a monologic block except for maybe an online chat. Processing conditions of the written language. In speech, the time factor plays a very important role. Words are spoken as they are decided and as they are understood. In writing, nevertheless, the writer has more time to plan and organize their message. Equally, the reader can take as much time as they want to reread and check before interpreting the message, that is, they can read at their own pace. Reciprocity conditions of the written language. Contrary to what happens in speech, writing is not typically a reciprocal activity. This is compensated by a greater need for logical organization, by greater clarity, and by the use of grammatical and stylistic techniques for focusing attention on main points. Besides, the writer has to anticipate the reader's understanding, general knowledge, cultural and literary schemata, and, most importantly, their interpretation. Regarding readers, they have to interpret language with only the written words themselves acting as contextual clues. They have no way of signaling potential problems to the writer, and this becomes especially thorny when it comes to understanding presuppositions. Readers, therefore, have to put in some compensatory work in order to make their reading successful. Situations of written communication. Written language situations present the following characteristics. They are non-interactive, there's one participant, it's not face-to-face, it's not in the same place at the same time, language is not used as an action, language is used to reflect, it's not spontaneous, planning, drafting and rewriting are quite common, it's not casual and it's formal. Students need to become L2 literate, since written communication is continually present in our day-to-day lives. We make use of the written word for purposes such as to learn and to get information, for pleasure, to establish and keep a social relationship with someone, and for academic purposes. Students need to be able to tell apart different types of writing, know what the purpose of reading and writing them is, and therefore know what to select. Similarly, they should be acquainted with the different genres, namely narration, description, argumentation and exposition. This will allow them to have some knowledge of what to expect when they read, or what they should be aiming at when they write. On the receptive side, it is important to mention the classic distinction between extensive and intensive reading. In extensive reading, we deal with longer texts, often for pleasure and with emphasis on the overall meaning, whereas in intensive reading we deal with shorter texts in order to get specific and detailed information out of them. The productive and receptive dimensions of reading communication. Communication, whether written or spoken, involves two types of skills: productive or co-productive, including speaking and writing, and receptive-interpretative, including listening and reading. The written register is shared by written and reading, which shall now be treated separately in order to focus on the peculiarities of each. Productive skill, writing. The nature of communication. When writers use language for communication, they undergo the following processes. First, they want to say something. Second, they have some communicative purpose, and third, they select from their language store. Writing subskills. Writing is probably the most difficult skill. It is a very complex linguistic and cognitive process. Moreover, it has to be learned contrary to what happens in speaking or reading, which can be transferred from the mother tongue. The main subskills necessary to master written productions and interaction would be graphical or visual skills, that is, the mechanics of writing, including spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and so on, grammatical and lexical skills, expressive or stylistic skills, rhetorical skills, which refer to the student's ability to use linguistic cohesive devices, and organizational skills. Given the difficulty of writing, we should not ask for everything from the very beginning, but rather proceed gradually from controlled practice, going through guided writing, to finally ask our students to do some free or creative writing. Receptive-interpretative skill, reading. The nature of communication. When readers try to understand what writers say, they undergo the following processes. First, they want to read something. Second, they are interested in the communicative purpose of what's being read. And third, they process a variety of language. Top-down and bottom-up processing phenomena in reading. The bottom-up approach sees comprehension as a matter of going from the specific units, letters and words, to the global general meaning. The top-down approach, however, considers that the reader proceeds from their background knowledge of the non-linguistic context into the arena of making decisions about what something means. In practice, a reader continually shifts from one focus to another, and that's become known as interactive reading. Subskills involved in reading. To start with, it is important to note that all of the subskills involved in reading are largely subconscious in the L1, but they can certainly create barriers for the learning in the L2, and that's the reason why we should reactivate them, therefore allowing to lower the student's anxiety by predicting, by scanning, skimming, recognizing functions and discourse patterns. So you know that, for example, is going to be followed by an example. In other words, is a way of reformulating a sentence, etc. Deducing meaning from context, distinguishing between literal and implied meanings, and tolerating ambiguity. In conclusion, the written word has traditionally been sanctified and put on a pedestal by linguistic analysis. It was planned and polished, contrary to what happened in speech. This accession, however, was due to the fact that linguists only analysed the finished product, which is clearly a highly idealised version of the writing process. Fortunately, modern linguistic analysis pays attention to the written word as the product of a veritable intricate process. The written register is shared by reading and writing, which, though sharing the same medium, differ in the cognitive processes they require, namely reception and interpretation in reading and production in writing. This means talking about different procedures, techniques and strategies in the classroom. In general terms, however, what's common to the teaching of the different skills is that tasks must reflect facts about real life, becoming sufficiently realistic, stimulating and motivating for the students. Besides, the skills tend to be taught contemplating 3 different stages: before, while and after. Although this is applicable to all the skills, it becomes of paramount importance in the case of the receptive-interpretative, since it allows for contextualization and the connection with productive skills, therefore creating a product out of what has been read. To end with, it goes without saying that skills have to be integrated in the classroom in the same way as they are in real life. In the particular case of writing skills, it should be noted that reading texts provide very good modules for English writing, and this is of a very high importance, since when teaching writing, students need to be shown models of what they're being encouraged to do. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out the other topics. Like, comment, subscribe, whatever, and I'll see you in the next one.